All right, welcome everyone. A belated Happy New Year to you. Let's hope that this year is a better year than we all had last year. So let's hope and welcome everyone. And I hope you had a lovely day yesterday for Australia Day. And so let's get underway. So we're going to look at the three key elements of productive working relationships in teams. And I want to share with you some very interesting research that probably in one way you'd be aware of this, but it does confirm it just by the research. So teams are always interesting. They're always complex because you've got lots of people working in teams. They've each got relationships with each other. Then you've got relationships between yourself as the team leader, if you are, and your team members. And that's not to mention, of course, that the team have got relationships with a variety of stakeholders. So it's quite a complex sort of arrangement of relationships when you think about it. By the way, this session is being recorded, so you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this. And I've got a special bonus for you at the end of this session that you might like to take advantage of. All right, so let's look at what we're going to do today. There's three things I want to do in our short session together. I want to talk about the concept of task and relationships. And all teams are a mix of task and relationships. Obviously, the task is what you do, and the relationship is perhaps how you go about it working with your colleagues. And so we'll look at those. I want to emphasize today the relationship aspect of teams, not so much the task, because I am not an expert in what you do, but I'm a little bit of an expert in terms of the way relationships are managed in teams. Share with you, as I mentioned, some very interesting research from Pentland, who is a researcher from MIT who put together some very interesting research on the relationship dimension of teams. And then I'm going to finish up with the three key elements that really separate a mediocre team from a high-performing team. So we'll actually look at those. And these are the three key elements, of course, that are in the title of the workshop. Okay. So thinking about task and relationship, it's really interesting, isn't it? When a team's formed, not what normally happens is we might do an obligatory team building exercise with a new team. So we might be the leader of the team and we come into an established team, or perhaps we've got a new team. And so what we might do is we might engage someone like myself to run a one-day workshop. And then that's pretty much it. That the relationship part has been done, and then of course it's all into the task of what needs to be done. So there's a strong bias towards the task dimension of teams, and of course that's what you get paid to do. But let's be honest, it's the relationship aspect of teams that really is the problem often. It's not so much the task. Two people don't see eye to eye, or perhaps you've got a difficult relationship with one member of the team. And those sorts of situations can be very costly in lots of ways. And it can also be very time consuming in order to try and resolve it. So it's not an easy sort of scenario, but we don't spend, I guess my key message is we don't spend enough time working on the relationship dimension of teams. And I think that's to our detriment, or at least to the teams. We do know from high-performing teams, whether they're teams in the sporting world or whether they're in the business world, we do know that high-performing teams do spend a little bit extra time working on the relationship dimension of the teams, building understanding and those sorts of issues. So I'm going to sort of confirm that with some of the research that we're going to share with you today. So just to tease that out a bit further, and just looking at this diagram that you've got on your screen, you'll notice that in a team, you've got task, which is up the top, and of course, relationship can be broken into two dimensions. There's a relationship between you and the team overall, so that might include how you run your team meetings. And then there's a relationship between you and the individuals in the team, which of course is the individual relationships. There is also another dimension, of course, is the individuals and their relationship with each other. So let's just tease that out a little bit. Obviously, the task is what you do. So whether it's a service that you provide or goods that you produce, and the individual needs are pretty much around catering for the individual needs and interests and motivations of each team member, bearing in mind that they come to a team with their own individual aspirations, their own strengths and whatever. So a good team leader will look towards working with team members to get them to exercise their strengths in the interests of the team. And so that's one sort of subset of the relationship dimension. And then, of course, you've got the team dimension, and that is about remaining or maintaining harmonious relationships within the team, which is obviously more difficult because you're not always there. And these relationships are actually often created in the lunchroom or in the even in the corridor. And so that is not an easy thing to do. And sometimes, no matter what you do, it doesn't work. Two people just don't see eye to eye, and that's that. And so you kind of just muddle on through. But of course, that can be very damaging for the morale of the team, as we all know. We've all been in situations like that. So if we have a look at this little model here, which is Blake's model of, you can see that on the left-hand side, you've got a concern for people, and horizontally, you've got a concern for production. So you can substitute people and relationship, and you can substitute production for task. And so it's obviously an issue around a balancing act between the two. And so what Blake has done in his model is he's shown you 4 particular positions that you as a team leader can take. Now, each of these positions will be pretty much dependent on the situation that you're in. So, for example, if you look down the bottom on the left-hand corner, you can see that what they call impoverished leadership. In other words, it's got a low concern for people and a low concern for production. So this would be like a reluctant team leader who's been put in this position, who really doesn't want to be the team leader, but for whatever reason, they are designated as the team leader. So I'm thinking of examples like perhaps a highly technical person, like a laboratory worker, for example, who may be made or designated as the team leader based on their technical capability. But they're reluctant. They don't want to be in that role. So they don't do much in terms of either the people or the production side of things. They allow people to just do what they have always been doing. Now, obviously, that's not a great position to be in, and it's going to lead to some problems down the track. I'm sure you'd agree with that. So if you move across to the right hand, the quadrant down in the bottom right hand corner, this is a position where it's high on production and low on people. So in these sorts of situations, you've got a team leader who's very much focused on getting the task done, but really doesn't spend much time, energy, or effort working on the relationship dimension. Now, this is fantastic when we're in a crisis, because obviously in a crisis, you're expected to get on and get the job done at all costs because it's an emergency. And so the relationship dimension, of course, is put on the back burner while the crisis is being solved. Now, that would be quite a legitimate position to take, as I said, in some sort of an emergency. But you wouldn't want to be in that position all the time, because the relationship dimension, of course, is being neglected. Now, the one that I find very interesting is the country club one, which is in the top left-hand corner. The country club position is where the leader adopts a high concern for people, but a low concern for production. So, and I suppose I'm not a member of a country club, but I'm assuming that, it's very much based on alliances and relationship, but really in terms of what people do is probably not a lot in those sorts of environments. Now, this is a good position to be in when there's low morale. So if there's a low sort of morale in the team, it might well be worth stopping and downing tools and working on the relationship dimension. But of course, again, if you remained in that position, then nothing would get done, And while people might be happy working with each other, ultimately they wouldn't, because nothing in the team is actually getting done. And then over on the right-hand side at the top, you've got the team management position. And you might argue, surely that would be the best position because it's high on people, high on concern for people, and high on concern for production. But not necessarily, because as I mentioned, in different times and different situations, you need to be able to fluctuate around the model. So the best position is actually in the middle there, where you can move depending on the circumstances that you're in. And that way, what you're doing is you're balancing the task and the relationship, and depending on the circumstances, of course, that you're in. And that makes a difference. All right, we've just got a couple of comments here. Just somewhere, John saying, "Are you an All Black supporter?" John, you may be aware in my latest book, I do refer a lot to the All Blacks and some of the things that they do. I've often adopted the view that if you can't beat them, learn from them, John. So all I've done is I've learned from them. I don't necessarily support them, but I have enormous respect for what the All Blacks do, because obviously something is working extremely well for them to be having such a high ratio of wins. So hopefully that answers your question. And Michelle asks, should the coordinators of team management, should they be in the 9-9 area? I think, as I mentioned, Michelle, I think the idea is that the team, the coordinators should be able to fluctuate between the three there that are critical. I don't see a huge role for the impoverished, but I do see a role for coordinators to adopt, country club, team management, and task, and to be able to move between the three. So a good team leader is able to move between the three, regardless of their position in the organisation, depending on where they are. So thanks for the comments as well. So John, just getting back to your comment, yes, I've done a lot of. I'm a rugby enthusiast, and I've looked at the All Blacks and I've studied them, and I realised that they do things slightly different. And perhaps I can weave in a few examples of that as we move through. All right, so let's move on and let's look at some of the research that I mentioned earlier around these three key elements. Now, what Pentland did, Pentland was actually an IT guy, and he got a little gadget that people put on their lapel. And so what he did is he went into organizations and he looked at organizations, the ones that were performing high performing teams and mediocre performing teams. So he looked at them all, he got them to wear this little gadget. And what this little gadget did is it monitored the actual patterns of communication between the various team leaders. And so what he confirmed out of all of that was that if he had to find a differentiator between a high-performing teams, of which the All Blacks is one, and a mediocre team, he would argue that it's all about communication. All right, so he would say that it really is about, it's not the technical aspects, but it's more about how they communicate. And more importantly, what he said in his research is it's the patterns of communication. It's not so much what's said, it's the patterns. And so this little monitor, he could actually determine the various patterns that people had, the various patterns that each team had. What he found was that high-performing teams, there was more communication between team members, and one or two members didn't dominate the conversations, which is very common, isn't it, in teams where you've got one or two people who dominate, and then you've got perhaps one or two are just sitting back. And so that was interesting. It's the way the teams communicate, he found, in the informal situations, not in the team meetings. Because if you think about it, in a team meeting arrangement, which if you're the team leader, you're running that. And so you're running that, and it's pretty much a sort of a set piece, isn't it? It happens maybe once a week. But in the corridors, the impromptu conversations that go on, he argued that they were the critical differentiators between high-performing teams and mediocre teams. So in other words, high-performing teams have more informal conversations in the corridor, what we might call corridor conversations, than a mediocre team. And not only do they have more, the the conversations themselves are more evenly dispersed between the team members. In other words, everyone in the team are having these conversations. They feel part of the team. So he argues that the best predictors of productivity are the team's energy and engagement outside the formal team meetings. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, I'm a team leader or I have team leaders. How do I make that happen? Because obviously I'm not there at the time. And how can I be in these corridors when people are having these conversations? Well, of course you can't. But it's all about trust and a whole range of other factors that I will get into. And I've got a series of these workshops that I'll get into a little later. And according to Pentland's research, energy and engagement actually accounts for a third of the variation in dollar terms of team productivity. Now you might say, how did he work that out? Well, having monitored the team for a period of time of over a month, he could then compare those patterns of communication with the bottom line of the team. And he found, of course, that the patterns that were more dispersed and there were more informal conversations. He found that that made a huge difference. And not only that, he found that it was the energy of those conversations and the engagement. And by energy, I don't mean people bouncing off the walls with excitement, but it was pretty much around the fact that people felt compelled to give their point of view. They were perhaps fairly passionate about the message that they were giving. And if they didn't agree with something, they were prepared to say it. So we'll talk about that a little further in a moment too. So it does beg the question, folks, doesn't it? Does a high-performing team promote better communication between team members? Is that how it happens? So if we can get people in our teams to communicate more effectively, is that going to produce a high-performing team? Or could it be that better communication is actually a byproduct of a high-performing team? It's an interesting question. It's a chicken and the egg situation. What comes first, high performance or communication? My sense is it's a bit of both. And I think there's something that you can do about it as a leader. But ultimately, I think if you show me any high performing team, I'll show you a team that really has the communication piece pretty well worked out. People have robust conversations. They can agree to disagree. But once those conversations have taken place, and as I said, a lot of them are informal, then the team can move on from that. So I think that probably, and of course, if that happens, then the team is a high functioning team. So it really does actually seem quite absurd when you think about it, that it seems that how we communicate could be as much more important to the success of a team than what we communicate. So what we say, according to this research, is less important than how we communicate. In other words, if there is linkages between all the team members. Now, what Pentland could do from his research is he could draw out these maps and show who communicated with whom at which point. And he found that the high-performing teams, there were stronger links between all the team members in terms of the patterns of communication. So this is important. And you know, and I know that if you have one person in the team that's difficult, it can really make the team very difficult to work with. Morale drops off, people get upset, and all sorts of things can happen which are not necessarily productive. So arguably, there are 5 key communication factors in a high-performing team environment. Let's have a look at them. Everybody in a high-performing team contributes equally in their casual interactions. There's not one or two people, maybe they're new in the team, who don't think that they have a role, and so they don't talk much. They just simply passively go along with what's going on. That doesn't happen in a high-performing team. And the other side of it is we don't have one or two people apart from the team leader who monopolise those conversations. Secondly, meaningful conversations occur face to face with vibrance and energy. So these are not what some people might call dehydrated conversations. Dehydrated conversations are conversations that are just, how are you? You know, how was your day? Pretty superficial, albeit polite. So meaningful conversations are stating what you think and, being willing to put your view to other team members. And in this case, we're talking about the corridor conversation, not just the team meeting. Thirdly, team members communicate with one another without the need of the team leader. So what we find in high-performing teams is that the team leader does have an important role to play, no doubt about that. No one's suggesting that the team leader doesn't have a role to play, but that the team members don't rely on the team leader. So for example, two people will get together with a problem that they've got to solve. They will work out what a potential answer is to that problem. That'll be the conversation that they have. And out of courtesy, they might let the team leader know what they decided and why they decided to go down that road. That is very much a hallmark of a high-performing team. Fourthly, they engage in more one-on-one conversations with each other than usual. And this is not about just organising social functions or barbecues, although those things can be helpful, and I do think they have their place. But these are the spontaneous meetings that go on in the workplace between various members of the team when they want to talk to each other about a particular piece of work that they're working on their team. Excuse me. Now, team members are willing to network. This is an interesting point. We find that in high-performing teams, the members of the team are willing to network with those outside the team. And they don't leave it to the team. They don't leave it to the team leader to make those decisions. And so, excuse me. So they don't leave it to the team members to make those decisions. The team members themselves feel comfortable networking, and they build up their alliances with their stakeholders in other parts of the organisation. But mediocre teams, there's a tendency for them to think that the team leader is the person who is the one who is responsible for building good stakeholder relationships. And that's not the case, because really, let's face it, there are people in your teams who actually have better understanding and better relationships with other people outside the team. And let's face it, teams will not function very effectively without good stakeholder management. So, coming to the three key elements of team, and I guess this is the key message out of our session today, in our short session, is that there are three key elements that separate a high-performing team. One is energy, another is engagement, and the third one is exploration. So what do they actually mean? Well, energy is defined as the frequency and value of conversations between team members. So high-performing teams have more informal conversations with each other, and those conversations are not what I call dehydrated conversations. Now, they also engage in the sense that everybody talks to everybody else. So there's a nice even spread of discussion between the various members of the team. And thirdly, exploration is about the team seeking out the resources and the people and so forth that they need beyond the boundaries of the team. So they're quite willing to actively go out of their way to build good stakeholder relationships. And I guess in many respects, this is probably common sense, but I think now what we do know is that it's now backed up by by research. We do know now that these are the differentiators. And so if you've got two teams, let's take the sporting world, for example, you've got two teams of equal ability, different, their skill levels about the same. The differentiator will be the relationships between the team members. It'll make all the difference, interestingly enough. And those conversations will really drive the team and give it lifts trust, it lifts morale, people can clarify things and so forth. And of course, this happens off the field if it's a team on the field, although people do have conversations on the sporting field. And so the hard work of a high performing team is to how we can build trust levels sufficiently high enough to get these interactions going on between team members, between each other. And by doing that, hopefully, as we can see, performance will increase. So what's the key message out of all of this? I think the key message for you is don't just assume because you've got a team and there's a set number of people in the team and they've all got a certain skill level that that's all you can do. If you work hard on the relationship dimension of teams, it may not always pay off, of course, for a variety of reasons. But if you're really looking at developing a high performing team, it's the relationship dimension that's going to make the difference, not so much the task. Now, they're related, because if relationships are working reasonably well, there's a reasonable chance that the tasks will also be more effective, or the performance will lift as a result of that. So, folks, are there any questions that people have got before we move on? Any other comments, observations, questions, whatever? All good? Okay. Now, I just wanted to leave you with a little incentive that you might enjoy. My book, Winning Teams, is coming out later this year. We're not absolutely sure of a date, but we know for sure it's coming out this year. Because of COVID, things have been muddled around a bit like everything else. And I'd like to offer you the opportunity to purchase that book, pre-order, for the sum of $30 plus postage. And if you pre-order with me, I will offer you an online course. And what I'll do is I send you through all of the details for that. And that online course gives you an opportunity to look at a deeper level at some of these issues and some of the issues in the book. So that by the time you get the book, which I will sign for you and send out to you, by the time you get the book, of course, you're well and truly ahead in terms of some of the things that you need to do. So that's valued at $675. And all you've got to do is just send me an email by close of business today. Just say, I'd like a copy of the book, Tim. I'll arrange all that for you. You'll either be able to pay online or we'll send you an invoice, whatever works for you. And immediately after that, I'll send you the details so you can log in. And the program, online program, Building Highly Effective Teams, will lead you through some of the how-tos around some of these concepts, which obviously is a useful exercise for you. So that's my offer for you. And at this stage, if there's no other comments or questions, happy to hear from you. Stay tuned. I'll be sending you an email, perhaps today or tomorrow. And what you'll get a copy of the slides that I've just run through, and you'll also get a copy of the recording as well. So you'll get all of those things in the mail, in your email. So keep your eyes tuned. So thanks, folks. Looking forward to hearing from you. We've just got one comment here before we wrap up. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. Very interesting as usual, valuable content. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Pip. I appreciate the feedback as well. So thanks, folks. That's it from me. So we'll wish you all the best and stay tuned. Thank you and goodbye.